the Havasupai people, they took blood from 200 Havasupai adults, telling them only that it was for diabetes research, and then this other scientist used that to do her own research on schizophrenia and mental health in Havasupai people, with no acknowledgement, with no permission, with no no openness with the people to say, I'm using your genetic material, I'm using your blood, and blood, which is something that was very culturally important, not to anybody, but the Havasupai people, it was a big deal for them to agree to even give their blood samples in the first place, and they were betrayed in a horrible fashion. So that's one of the reasons that we are talking about Indigenous research frameworks today, because this is information that should be under the strict control of tribes and only used or done with their permission. So with that kind of as a background, I want to go ahead and pass it over to Neil, who is going to take us through our project. So Neil, take it away and just let me know when to advance the slides.
I just want to see all of the Indian people signing in here on the chat. Can you all hear me okay?
We can, but you are breaking up a little bit. You might want to turn off your video for the time being, so that way we can it'll be more bandwidth for your audio. Thanks, Neil.
No problem.
That's better. Okay.
Okay. Well, as I just wanted to say, for everyone joining in, it's so good to see all of the different communities and rancherias and Indigenous participants in this. I love seeing all of the different places everyone is from in the chat box here. And so Shasta gave a great introduction for a recent effort that we're moving through, and we're here to just kind of talk about that effort and see whether or not you're all interested in playing a role or helping us with this project called Collecting Examples of Indigenous Research Frameworks, Protocols, and Methodologies. It's quite a long title because I think it's very inclusive. We can go to the next slide. Shasta. So here's just a slide on our mission. We were actually created by the National Tribal Operations Committee over a decade ago, actually almost 2 decades ago, actually. And really it was about, figuring out sound science and cultural approaches to meet the needs of our Indigenous nations. We here in Region 2 don't typically use the word tribe or we prefer to use nations. But the TSC is comprised of tribal representatives from each region and EPA representatives from each region. And we're fortunate to have the support of the Office of Research and Development. You go to the next slide, Shasta. So as I mentioned, I think it was 2001. It is one of the only partnership groups with both EPA and tribal scientists together. We are one of many tribal partnership groups. Probably some of you are involved in a tribal partnership group out in your region. There are many. One of the roles that the TSC plays, like many partnership groups, is thinking about how the science needs of our Indian nations across the country are integrated into the science priorities that EPA has as a national agency and as regional offices as well. We do often get asked to participate in OMB, in the OMB process, to think about how the agency is meeting these science needs. We can go to the next slide. That's just to say, you know, a short message that if they're outside of what we're discussing today, if there are very specific science needs that you are seeing in your own communities, this is the goal of, you know, the council is to see those addressed, to brought to a national level, and to find overlaps, to find commonalities between our nations and our borders that that we can work on collectively. I think I mentioned most of this already. This is actually a good segue into the next slide. This is a picture taken outside of our territory here. This is about less than a mile from where I'm sitting today. This is the Onondaga Nation Longhouse on the Onondaga Nation territory near Syracuse, New York. And this was a meeting that we had, I think, in 2014 or 2015, sometime around there. And the meeting was focused on traditional ecological knowledge. Many of you will recognize that term. And if you go to the next slide, we're actually kind of following through on one of the approaches that the council was interested in regarding TEK. Our purpose today is really to describe to you what we're all doing right here and what we're talking about. And this is a nice breakdown of trying to understand the research needs that your communities may have. And one of the things that we've done to educate ourselves as a Tribal Science Council is to hear from those both in academia, but more importantly at the tribal level, who are also thinking in this way, addressing some of those concerns that Shasta provided in the introduction here. And one of those I would just, I would encourage you all to think about this, and I think it's in red here, it's hard for me to see, but is this the US Data Sovereignty Network?
Yes.
Link, yes. So,
Yes.
So perhaps somebody can provide that in the chat box. We heard directly from folks working in this area, in this wheelhouse. And there are some other great tools out there as well. Some of you may be aware of an interesting similar process going on, more focused on cultural research, cultural resource research protocols maintained by the National Park Service. What we'd like to do from this perspective is really to find those examples where EPA has entered into some kind of data partnership with the nations. As Shasta mentioned, and we all probably can speak from experience, we often get a phone call from an agency, from perhaps even an NGO or a university researcher or student that says, look, I'm researching this and I'd like to help you guys, right? We all know that line. And we have to think carefully about their role in our communities, right? And in particular, whether there are existing protocols that researcher should adhere to. And so these examples are what we're seeking today. We're asking each of you to consider whether you are aware or whether you know of these research protocols, really to think about the threads and focus areas that those protocols cover, right? I know in my own community, one of the things that we focus on is non-disclosure agreements. We think about how the information is going outside of the community for whose use, and more importantly, for what purpose, right? These are often kind of the threads or the common areas that these protocols and research agreements address. What we'd like to do with those is, of course, to just collate them so long as they are publicly available, and to make available for all nations to learn from each other, to really assess our common strengths and weaknesses in terms of, in some cases, tribes have no protocol, I would imagine. That research is being done on your territories, perhaps on your people or your ancestors, without any agreement in place. And that's important to know as well. So even if there are no examples that you're aware of, that is something to be aware of. As we always talk about in Western science, you know, a no answer is an answer in a lot of ways. Zero is a piece of data. We go to the next slide here. And feel free, Jose or others on the call to jump in. We are thinking that this list here, it certainly is not a comprehensive list, but there are many ways in which these protocols are expressed, right? One of the immediate things that happen right away, often in our communities, is that the tribe passes a resolution that says, you know, we are concerned about the research going on in our community, and here's how we plan to address it. A lot of times, those resolutions lead to these other instruments, including research agreements, data management plans. Ironically enough, perhaps, for those of you who are very familiar with quality assurance project plans, that are required by the EPA to gather data. If we think about those in a larger sense, they are, in a way, research protocols. They do identify issues around the chain of custody. And we heard a great example from Max Liberon up in Mi'kmaq territory in Nova Scotia, talking about how she thinks about the disposal of samples that are gathered from within Indigenous territories in a very, in a cultural perspective, from a cultural perspective, and really honoring, recognizing, and following through with the wishes of that community with respect to those samples. A lot of other communities have initially said, you know, well, we don't have a specific tribal research protocol. We do partner with an agency, in this case, often a university, who have established institutional review board. Some of you are probably familiar with that term, but it is a board that is typically set up within universities to guide conducting research, particularly around human subjects, and often with a special focus on subjects at risk. And so in many cases, nations have actually sort of utilized a local IRB, sometimes associated with a tribal college even, or as I said, a partnering university, to ensure these protocols are followed through on. And as I mentioned, another maybe even very straightforward instrument here is a non-disclosure agreement. That seems to be where we're headed towards here in Haudenosaunee country, requiring EPA researchers who come to our community to sign these non-disclosure agreements even before they enter the territory. Next slide. So here's the request to you all. If you could help us identify these research frameworks and policies employed in and around your territories, ones that you know of, and more importantly, ones that either could be shared or perhaps even referenced. I think that, as I mentioned, there could be a lot of learning that we do from each other, right? I'm very curious about all of the folks on the line here who are coming from a rancheria or pueblo or a territory, a community that have taken maybe a different approach than we've identified in this slideshow. Maybe there are very novel ways in which to address research being done in your community. And we'd like to hear about those. And I think one of, just to highlight again, one of the important aspects of this project is to also make sure that EPA themselves are aware of these protocols and these research practices. And so there's a great deal of education, I think, that needs to go on within federal agencies regarding this. So that's where we're headed here. I want to open it up for others on the call who would like to add what they will. And also, perhaps if you have a question, you can sort of type it into the chat box, I would imagine, too. And we can go from there. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Neil. And before I move on to a couple of other slides that I wanted to discuss, actually, I have a question. Have we received any protocols from anybody yet?
That's a great question, Shasta. We have, I'm going to start my video just so I can speak here. So let me know if it's not coming through, but we have received sort of secondhand word from folks saying, I know of this example here, but there's been no, let me rephrase that, in fact. One of the initial findings that we've found in speaking to the various RTOCs around the nation is that we see a strong effort in this area regarding cultural resources and human health. So for instance, there were some folks who said, you know what? The Navajo Nation has an institutional review board and it's really designed around human health. And so that's a great example. And we're reaching out to those review boards or universities that have a framework for this, right? It's not often just a one-off, here's the policy, here's our 7-page document on the research process, but it comes embedded within a larger framework of relationship between the researcher and the community. So I would say for environmental research specifically, we have not seen a strong response to date.
So you hear that, Region 9? There's how many people on here now? 93 people. Don't embarrass me. Let's send in some examples. I wanted to see if Rebecca had anything she wanted to add to this, or Jose, before I move on to a couple of other slides.
This is Rebecca. Go ahead.
Jose, what do you think?
I have nothing to add. Thank you, Neil and Shasta. I'm taking notes from the chat, and yeah, this is great.
All right, great. Well, then I'm going to go through just a few more slides because I think it's important to talk about why there should be an Indigenous research protocol. So that's the question. Why develop an Indigenous research framework? And Neil talked about the different types, that there's some cultural research frameworks, or there's tribal institutional review boards, but we haven't seen a whole lot of examples of these frameworks that are related to work in science and research and the environment. But regardless of what subject matter you're thinking of doing one for, it should apply to everything from cultural knowledge to traditional ecological knowledge to just any academic work that the tribe might want to participate in. So this is one of the main bullets. Why would you want to do this? Because you want to protect tribal knowledge. And just like I mentioned in the beginning, talking about examples of unethical research that's taken place or some of the consequences of research before there were these sorts of protections or these ethical standards. Protecting tribal knowledge also means, actually Indigenous knowledge throughout the world. There's knowledge out there that will be taken by unscrupulous people and used for their own purposes. So for example, finding a plant that has medicinal purposes, and then suddenly, next thing you know, a plant that is of tribal importance that a researcher learned about because of tribal knowledge ends up becoming somebody's patent and ends up becoming somebody's drug research. And that is a breach of tribal knowledge and tribal rights. So you're protecting tribal knowledge, not just so that it is maintained in your tribe, but also so it can't be exploited by others. And it's the unfortunate reality that this is the way we have to think about the work that we do, is that people might say they've got good intentions, but then they come into saying they're doing one thing, like in Havasupai, and they end up doing something else. You need to have something in place to protect your tribal knowledge. It's also important to center tribal research priorities. So I'm not teaching anymore, but for 14 years I taught anthropology at California State University, San Marcos, and in my lecture on ethics in anthropology, this is one of the things that I taught my students, that regardless of what you may want to do with your research, you need to center the priorities of the community that you're working with. So in the case of tribal research priorities, when I came to Paula to do my research, I did my research on tribal gaming. What's the effect of the Paula Casino on tribal politics and economics? But I got the tribe's permission to do that. And if I had come to them with that research proposal and they said, well, okay, fine, the casino, I guess that's interesting. But what we are really interested in is for you to do some work on our traditional plant knowledge. We want to document our ethnobotanical knowledge. And my response as a researcher needs to be not, well, yeah, okay, I guess, but I'm going to do the casino thing anyway. No, my response is, okay, that's your priority. Then if I can't do that myself, let me connect you with a colleague or another institution who specializes in that and has a graduate student or has a scholar who wants to work with you on that particular project. So you don't just let people come in because they say, well, this is what we want to do. They need to prioritize what you want to do, what your tribe wants to do. And your research framework gives you a way to hand that over and say, look, this is how you approach us. And this is how you respect our needs and our priorities. So put that in writing, and it becomes a lot easier to be able to just hand that over and say, we are going to center our priorities over any priority that you may have. This is also an assertion of tribal sovereignty. You don't have to comply with any request for data. Well, let me back that up a little bit. Obviously, there are some things we do have to report because of federal law. So things like testing our water systems if you're on well water, that kind of thing. There are statutory regulations and laws that we have to abide by as far as data is concerned. But it is an assertion of your tribal sovereignty. If an agency person or a scholar, a student comes to you and says, well, you should let me do this because it's going to be good for X, Y, and Z reasons, you still have every right to assert sovereignty and say, I don't have to supply you with this information. Now, U.S. Forest Service, I don't have to tell you what we're doing on our lands that might be relevant to Forest Service lands near the reservation. you know, you might want to share those things, but you don't have to. So again, having a formalized Indigenous research framework or a protocol, you can put your statements about tribal sovereignty and what your priorities are for that right there into that document. You know, in Paula's case, we tend to be very close to the vest about our water. This is not something that we necessarily want to provide, and we don't have to. So that's why an assertion of tribal sovereignty is so important. And this ties into controlling access to tribal data. So, you know, I keep coming back to the Havasupai example, but you know, that wasn't just tribal data. That was tribal blood samples. You know, that was tribal health, and that was tribal privacy on both an individual and on a community level that was breached when that unethical scientist used that data or used those samples for research that the Havasupai had not agreed to. So you can put your research framework together, your protocol, to control that access, you know, and it can be everything from a broad statement of, we will always maintain the rights, you know, to this intellectual property. But it can also be something as specific as, when your research project is over, you will return to us every single sample that you took, whether it's a biological sample, whether it's something from an archaeological project. We control that access. Only we can have that data. So put that into your framework as well. And then finally, benefit to tribal communities. You don't want to engage in research that's not going to be beneficial to your community. So that might be something that within your own community or with your own data review boards, your own tribal leadership, even if you put together a community committee on this kind of thing, you can sit around together and brainstorm. What is it that we prioritize as a benefit to us as a community? Let's say that we have a substance abuse problem and a scientist wants to come in and explore substance abuse in our community. Is that a benefit to our tribal community? Now, from the outside, somebody might say, well, yeah, maybe you can find out what are some of the triggers for substance abuse, or what is the most common substance that's abused. What are some ways to treat substance abuse? But if you as a community decide that that's something you want to handle internally and it will actually harm your community because perhaps it reinforces stereotypes about tribes and substance abuse, you can say, this is not something that we want to engage in. It's not a benefit to us to have that be something that gets researched in a public fashion. So these are just a few of the bullet points. I'm sure you can all think of your own and in ways to frame a research protocol. And what I'm really hoping is that when I end this slideshow and I'm able to see the chat again, because for some reason I can't see it while I'm sharing my screen, that people are putting in questions and they're adding comments and they're volunteering that they have their own protocol that they're willing to share, or that perhaps maybe Region 9, RTOC, needs to put together an Indigenous research framework working group. And I suddenly I feel like I just volunteered myself for something. So if Mervyn Wright, if you're on this panel, I didn't just say that. But now I want to go ahead and I'm going to show you the, oh, whoops, I forgot the last one, support. You guys can probably imagine on your own what supporting ethical research in tribal communities is about, but this ties back into all of the above, that having your own framework is going to support the kind of ethical research that should be done in tribal communities. Okay, now I'm going to go to our contact information. I don't have Jose's on here, but I have Rebecca's. This is how to get in touch with any of us. This is, you know, any of us that you can call or send an email or share. If you have a digital version of a protocol or a framework that you'd like to share with us, this is where you can send it. And now I want to turn it over to Rebecca, who's going to give an example of some projects that she's working on.
Thank you, Shasta, and thank you for these principles. I'm taking a screenshot and I will keep them ever handy for me. In Region 9, I wanted to just highlight two ongoing projects. They are federally led, Office of Research and Development, but we have tribal partners. And I think this is a small way, but a good way to try to get some of these principles into EK into a 40-year-old institution. Are we 40 or 50 now? I can't remember how old EPA is.
50.
Ah, see, I was born around then, I should remember. But it's still shocking that I can say something happened 40 years ago and remember. Still hard. Anyway, so a couple of projects I just wanted to highlight. And Shasta, you have abstract on one of them, the first one, and she's going to put that in the chat, which is a file abstract about wood burning. Wood burning in the world continues to be an issue in terms of it's the only still the priority for heat and cooking, and there's international efforts to reduce wood burning or waste product burning in homes to reduce exposure to particulate matter and other things in the home that affect lungs and breathing. But that's also an issue here in the United States. Studies show that 63% of just the Navajo Nation alone still rely on wood burning for heat in their homes. And so the first initiative that our EPA's AIR program initiated with the Office of Research Development, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and Diné College out at Navajo is a study on wood burning. And the issue is the perception, culture, and science, a framework to identify in-home heating options to improve indoor air quality in the Navajo Nation. So the document that Shasta is going to share with you in the chat discusses the project, and it's all good and well to say that we know that wood burning inside the home can be problematic for breathing and air issues, but there's a lot of cultural and traditional symbolism around doing that. And so the paper talks about how the partners from the universities and EPA and Diné College at Navajo are going to try to research and look at this matter. Jose, do you have a question? You have your hand like this, like you're, oh, okay. I thought that was a key, like I'm thinking, I have.
Sorry, I'm very handsy. You're good.
Okay, so that's just one thing I wanted to share with you guys that's going on right now. And then the second one, this is in, I think they're mid to ending range of this project, but a brand new project that hasn't even started yet will involve partners again at Navajo. As many of you know, there's the uranium mining legacy at Navajo, and there is this cleanup being funded by a Kerr-McGee Tronox settlement. And one of the issues about the cleanup, oh, there's so many issues, but one of them is we've been studying livestock, implications of uranium in livestock, implications of the uranium mining legacy on water, but there's also plants and the traditional use of plants. And so partners from my colleagues, Jacob Phibbs and Elsa Johnson, are going to work with partners at Navajo to study that issue. Is it safe to use this plant? And they're going to look at all kinds of different plants at various locations, at uranium legacy locations. That project is just starting. So those are two things that I know these are federally led. They aren't tribally led, but we do have tribal partners. And I think it's good in a modest sense to try to, excuse me, acquaint the agency further with the TEK principles and citizen science, and that's what this, particularly the second project, is trying to do. Is there any questions?
Jose, have you seen any questions in the chat box that we want to address?
No questions. We have a lot of really good feedback and comments, a lot of links to some examples. The Sisseton example is really exciting to me to have one from a tribal nation there. Definitely work by collaboratives, research collaboratives, some federal, and I think all of these are really useful.
And I just shared a link. Well, first of all, I shared the PDF of our presentation in the chat so folks can grab that. And I also just added a link to I can't remember the acronym. It's called, well, the acronym is CLEAR, but Neil had mentioned a researcher, Max Leroy. She's up in Nova Scotia, and he has a really, really good thing going with her. It's the Civic Laboratory for Environmental Action Research. So I went and put her link in the chat there. And I just have to read you the tagline because I love it, but it's Civic Laboratory for Environmental Action Research, or CLEAR, is a feminist anti-colonial lab specializing in monitoring plastic pollution. And Max came to one of our TSC meetings back in June, I believe it was, and gave us this just amazing, mind-shattering presentation about how to decolonize research. And, you know, and she's doing plastic pollution. You're like, you know, what's colonial about researching plastic pollution? Well, you'd never guess, but some of the things that you have to research do have to do with indigenous knowledges. So if you're doing work with, say, a community that still does some traditional subsistence fishing or harvesting, and you want to work with them to see, say, what kind of microplastics are ending up in the flesh of the fish that they're catching, or the walrus, or the seals, and you're potentially revealing some information about their practices that they didn't want to have revealed. That is an indigenous concern. And if you don't address the way that those folks see these problems, then you're not doing participatory, you're not doing collaborative research. So if you want to take a look at Max's work, if you're concerned about the feminist framework, don't be. Remember, feminism is just about equality for everybody. Women, trans, all people. So go ahead and take a look at that, because she has some really, really great stuff in there. But I am seeing that a lot of you are now, or at least a few of you are saying, hey, I want to do that Indigenous framework working group. So now I'm scared. That's now a thing I have to do. But I see Cindy Smallwood has volunteered. We've got Melissa from the U.S. Forest Service. She wants to know if she can be part of the working group. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. I just joked the other day that I need to tattoo the word no on my forehead, so that way people will just see it automatically, and I don't end up putting myself into something. But this is the work that I love. So I see Kelsey Stricker from Pechanga, Lo Stewart. So you guys email me, and we'll have to bring it up at the next R Talk. And I love the fact that it looks like so far, is it all women who are volunteering? We need to have a dude just for balance.
I'll help.
You'll do it, Jose?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, we need one woman for every 5 men. I think that's, one man for every 5 women. Hello.
Right.
I think that's a reasonable balance.
It's been unbalanced for millennia, Shasta, so it's okay.
Yeah. We have another one here from L. Bruce, outside of the U.S. Here's some great examples from New Zealand and the Maori on research and data governance. Oh, that could be useful for us. Yeah, that's true. It points out that New Zealand has the world's first river with legal rights as a human, which is, that's a heavy lift to get people to acknowledge that humans aren't the only living things, and animals and plants aren't the only living things, but rivers and mountains and skies and those are all also living things, especially from an indigenous point of view.
And one thing too, Shasta, that is the Tribal Science Council has been reaching out to folks in New Zealand, to the Maori. We've had a presentation from the South Pacific trying to learn from what's going on there. So we recognized that this effort and the information is global, and that there are good best practices all around the earth.
Yes, absolutely. And as I'm scrolling through the chat, and I know you all can see this, but that doesn't mean that you're looking at everything. Josephine Kamkoff has a good point too, that she says pollutant sources are frequently off reservation in another jurisdiction, and polluters use political boundaries as a way to avoid accountability. So, you know, that's something else to put into your, not necessarily a research framework in that instance, but into some sort of a tribal statement about how the rights of the tribe, you know, they don't stop at those political boundaries. Or like I like to say in climate change does not recognize reservation boundaries or country boundaries or any boundaries. Let's see, oh, and here's one from Lori Montserrat, who I work with a lot here in California. For researchers working with tribal nations, I think it's important that we document this internally as well. I might be a, quote, good researcher, but the person who comes next may not be. As a researcher, you need to protect anyone who gives you the gift of their time and energy. So I know there's folks that are on the call or on the panel right now who are not, they don't work for tribes or they're not tribal citizens. And so I'd be interested if you want to put into the chat if you've ever been asked by a tribe to sign a non-disclosure agreement, or if you've been provided with a copy of a tribe's research framework. If so, it would be interesting to hear that. You don't have to tell us from who, but it would be interesting to know if some tribes are already engaged in reaching out and protecting themselves in that way. We do have a question from Adam Cantor. He's curious. He says, how do most tribes deal with research and data requests? Council or special committee liaisons or tribe-specific protocols? You know, if anybody wants to answer that in the chat, that would be great. In my case, in Paula, we actually, I'm embarrassed to say, we don't have an Indigenous research protocol, but I want one. As the TIPA, we're working on one with our Cultural Resource Committee, and hope to have something put together relatively soon that we can just share with people who ask for our input. You know, and some of you are saying that you don't have one. Lori Montserrat says she hasn't been asked, and Lori works for California Department of Public Health. But for the tribes that we are working with, she says, we have told them and documented internally that nothing is to be shared without explicit permission. Oh, sorry, Cal EPA, not Cal Health. Sorry, Lori. But so I don't know about the rest of you, but I get research requests all the time. I just got one the other day from some students at Cal State San Marcos, and they're doing a senior project. They want to explore how tribes are managing sustainable energy issues. And because I was a professor for so long, anytime I get requests from students, I get all excited. I'm like, yay, you know, I always want to help students, but I'm not just going to say, sure, you know, show up and I'm going to give you anything you want. So if you have a gatekeeper, you know, if you serve as that gatekeeper yourself, that's probably the informal way that a lot of us deal with these kinds of requests, is just vetting them personally. And then if it seems like it's something that the tribe might be interested in, then you can take it to council and see if they want to engage in the research. But again, I think having something formal in place is useful. So that way when people reach out to you, you can say, here's our protocol and you need to send us a copy of your proposal. You need to send us an analysis of the potential risks and benefits. This is something you have to do if you go through an institutional research board. Even if the risk is something as minor as you might be bored to death during a 2-hour interview on sustainable energy, that's still a risk, right? But sometimes the risks are much, much greater. So you need to ask, what are the risks for us of participating in the research? So, you know, to answer your question, Adam, I'm sorry, it's not a great answer. But again, from L. Bruce, a lot of tribes don't have anything. Many tribes in the Southwest developed a process in reaction to the ASU Havasupai shenanigans. But even if they have it, doesn't mean they use it. So I mean, all joking aside, I do think it's important for us in Region 9 to have a working group on this and maybe develop some sort of a framework that can help people follow along, help tribes follow along, and customize it for the specific needs of their own community. And it would probably be a good idea to have, folks like Jose definitely on that, and maybe from some other, agencies just to get input, because there may be things on the agency side, and Jose, maybe you can answer this. There may be things on the agency side that we don't know about that we need to take account of when it comes to developing our protocols.
That's a great question, Shasta. I haven't found anything well detailed. I think most of the people here are probably familiar with some of the QAP requirements that EPA has for funded projects. And one of the challenges that we do, I think, run into is with sort of the data and where does it go. And I think we have had a great effort to find ways to make sure it's protected and that there are ways to access it privately for tribes. I know that our data office has been working hard in that and working with the e-enterprise collaboration with tribes and states to improve that. So some good movement there, but definitely places for us to work as well.
Thanks, Jose. Yeah, anytime I hear the acronym QAP, I break out into hives because those things are the devil. But that's an example too, though, of an agency-focused protocol. And yeah, you want to QAP for your air quality program, you want to QAP for your water sampling. That's important stuff. But a lot of times these research projects are focused more on internal kinds of things of importance to tribes. So it doesn't have to be this kind of mechanical quality assurance framework that you see in a QAP. But there are things to start from there. There might be legal regulations that we have to follow when it comes to some of this kind of work. Melissa from the Forest Service says she's interested in co-management of lands with tribes. So this topic is really important to me. I want to make sure that the information tribes provide to care for the land is safeguarded. Thank you, Melissa. That's great. And Cliff Benuelos has volunteered to be in the work group. Thank you, Cliff. Goody. Okay, Nevada. We got some representation from Nevada. John Lynn, I would like to suggest that when government researchers approach tribes to collaborate on research, the tribe should not need to provide funding for it. Oh, yes. Yes. Let me clap at that. Absolutely. You do not expect tribes, you should not expect tribes to fund your research. You've got to have your own way to do it. That's something else that's frequent in some of the research proposals that I see, is that there's just this assumption that tribes are going to be able to participate, and without any sort of resources to do so. And we're busy. We need to get something out of it if we're going to participate. So, Terry Red Owl is now volunteering. Oh boy, I've started something here. You guys are great.
Hey Shasta, and just a time reminder, you got about 5 minutes left.
Oh great, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I'm just loving to see the volunteers. The Ryan wants to know, does the work group have a specific goal, something tangible like a mission statement? No, because we just started it. I just came up with this idea in this panel, so maybe that's going to be our first order of business is what do you call it when you do strategic planning? Your mission statement, your purpose statement, your goals. So we'll have to work that out and then do one of those fun, what are they, threats, opportunities, barriers, and donuts, or whatever the acronym is. I don't know. But yeah, SWOT, thank you. Yes, I always forget what the S stands for. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Oh, now we need a good acronym. Oh, you guys are all over this. Well, you saw my email address in the chat, and it's on the last slide of the presentation, which I shared with you again in the chat, and it's also available on the page for this panel. And you know what? I know we've got like 2 or 3 minutes, but Jose, I don't know if you have any final words, or Rebecca. Neil had to step off because he had a class to get to at quarter till.
Just a big thank you to everyone. This has been excellent engagement. I'm excited by the idea of the R9R Talk organizing this work group and pushing this forward. And I know that our Tribal Science Council is eager to learn and be a part of that. And so just a heartfelt thank you to everybody.
Same. Rebecca?
I'll just pony on to what Jose said. He said it very well.
All right, great. Well, again, thank you, everybody. I think I'm gonna be able to get a copy of the chat. Kelly, maybe you can send that over to me so I can make sure I've got everybody's names who volunteered. I won't forget. Don't be mad at me later.
Yeah, sure thing.
And sorry, was somebody speaking up?
I just said, sure thing, I'll send it over.
Oh, great, thank you, Kelly. All right, everybody, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day at the virtual conference.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.